to talk about are trends, challenges, and opportunities. So those are the sort of three themes for tonight. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start out with what I call the global to the local view. I want to tell you about the big picture situation with light pollution in the world, narrow it down pretty quickly to our part of it, and tell you what it looks like here on the ground. Then I'm going to tell you something about what we're trying to do in the Southern Arizona chapter of DarkSky International to address these issues. We're now in our third year of a newly constituted chapter, and we're making some progress slowly but surely around the edges. And then last, I'll talk about both the challenges and the opportunities that we have coming up in this area to try to make the situation better for everybody, and certainly for astronomy. So first of all, what's the broad picture view right now of light pollution in the world? At some point, you have probably seen this image that is often referred to now as the black marble. This is an image that was made using data from NASA and NOAA satellites that orbit our planet and every night are taking pictures of the entire Earth. The Earth basically rotates underneath these satellites. They spend half their time on the sunward side, half their time on the night side. And to make this picture, they had to mosaic together many thousands of individual images to give you the impression that, number one, it's night everywhere in the world at once, and also ensuring that you had a clear sky, that there were no clouds in the direction of anywhere on Earth. So it's a very artificial view in that sense. But I think that's appropriate because what it's dominated by, number one, moonlight shining on the continents and separating them from the oceans, but also our cities, our artificial light at night, which you can see outlines almost all of the continents except for Antarctica. And you see across a fairly wide range of latitudes, there's a lot of light. The light is bright enough that astronauts aboard the space station can look out their windows and see it. And they can take pictures of it with handheld DSLR cameras. What I want to do now is zoom in on the United States, and then I'm going to talk more specifically about Southern Arizona. So if you gradually zoom into this picture around North America, this is what just the continental United States looks like. And you may have seen a version of this image before as well. Largely where you see those splotches of white, that's where the light is. You can tell where all the major cities are in the United States, right? That's pretty obvious. You can also see things like some of the paths of the interstate highways going east, west, or north, south, because there are towns every so often to serve the traffic on the interstates. The big difference that you notice is that there's not nearly as much of that light out here in the west, but there's a whole lot of it in the east. And if you're like me and you see maps of almost anything in the United States and you say, I'll bet that's a population density map. Whatever they're trying to show you in the map, what it's really showing you is where the people live. And if you guessed that about this map, you would be mostly right. So I took this map and I overlaid some false colors. So now there's a color ramp here from black to kind of this magenta color to orange to kind of a yellow, et cetera. And it's merged with that light at night map. And for the most part, you would be correct that the light at night map is a map of where the people live. And that tends to be the case in Western countries, more industrial economies. A lot of the world, places like India, China, Europe, places like that look a lot like this. So those two things map together pretty well. If you look at other parts of the world that are not as economically developed as we are, you don't see these patterns. You'll see areas where there is considerable population, but there is not a lot of light, which speaks more to their level of economic development. And in places like Africa, where electricity has not reached yet. And believe it or not, those places still exist in the world. What do we know about all of this? Of course, you know, you're astronomers. I don't have to tell you about what light pollution is, how it manifests itself. You live anywhere near the city, we all deal with this. It's part of something that impacts our observing. I could tell you, it would be a whole other presentation, but I could tell you about the myriad effects beyond astronomy. We know there's a big impact of all this artificial light at night on the world's biology, for example, including humans. We're part of the biological world. It has interactions with things like energy security and crime. traffic safety, et cetera. The main focus here is on astronomy, though. What do we know about it? We know that light pollution is almost everywhere. And you kind of guess that from the image of the world at night, that there's a presence on nearly every continent. Essentially, wherever people go, not always, but often, where people go, the light follows. And it depends on their access to resources like electricity. These figures that I'm showing you here are actually now a little bit stale. We don't have a truly global picture since about the year 2015. I'm going to show you an updated version of that map in a second here that gets into how things have been changing, particularly in the last roughly 10 years or so. So these numbers are probably conservative estimates now, but the majority of people in the world live in places that are impacted by light pollution. And the statistic that really got me in this paper that was now published 10 years ago was at that time, almost 90% of the people in Europe and over half of the population in the United States at that time lived in places that it never got completely dark at night. It was almost like a perpetual twilight, never reached that astronomical level of darkness. That's a lot of people. It impacts very many people, although a lot of them don't realize it because most of us spend most of our lives indoors at night. That's what I think has allowed this to progress to the extent it has, because mainly people don't see it. And if it's a gradual change, they can come to accept change in almost any environmental variable because they don't even realize it's happening. But it is happening and it's significant. And if there's a punchline to the whole talk, it's basically this, that not only in our part of the world, but in much of the world, the sky is getting brighter at an unbelievably high rate. I showed you this last time I was here. This is still the best that we have. This is the result of some work that was done by Chris Kaiba and collaborators in Europe, but it used data from a citizen science project called Globe at Night, which you probably have heard of. It is run literally across the street at our lab. And it asks volunteers around the world, citizen scientists, tens of thousands of them around the world, to estimate the brightness of the night sky using the number of stars in a particular constellation as a proxy for that number. And it turns out, with minimal training, people who have otherwise no background in astronomy are really good at measuring this thing, estimating the brightness of the night sky. What I'm showing you here is how that brightness has changed in a period of time that ran from 2011 to 2021, and comparing it to the brightness of the light emission on the ground as indicated by satellite. And the main thing I want you to notice is that there's kind of a magenta colored line and there's a yellow colored line, and they represent two different years, and one is above the other. That's an indication that in the intervening years, the sky got brighter around the world for almost all observers. There are shortcomings with the satellite data source that I mentioned to you. For example, it really doesn't see the color blue at all. And therefore, it's missing some of the light emissions that are associated with our ongoing transition in the world from older lighting technologies to the white LED that now dominates our world in many respects. So this is a bit of a more of a ground truth because it doesn't depend on those kinds of assumptions. People go outside, they look up, it's a reflection of what the visual characteristics of the night sky are, and they saw that in this 10-year period, the brightness of the night sky was increasing at the rate of about 10% per year. There is no environmental pollutant that I know of that has been increasing anywhere near that quickly, and it's happening on a global scale. The number that got picked up in the media about this at the time the paper was released was that at that rate, that 10% per year figure, means that over the course of a person's childhood, if you assume that's from age 0 to 18, wherever you're at in the world, as an average experience, by the time a child reaches adulthood, half of the stars that were visible in the night sky at the time of their birth are gone, obscured by sky glow. And again, this is happening all over the world. It's not just a problem of Western countries or developed economies. It's really happening everywhere. I said that we got a little bit of an update to this recently, which largely confirms those earlier results. This is from a paper that was just released a few weeks ago, and now the world is color-coded in a kind of a different way. And this is meant to indicate over a period of time that was about another decade and ran from kind of the earlier part of the 2010s to the early part of the 2020s. And it's coded according to this red-blue dichotomy, and that's what this thing is down here in the lower left corner. If an area is kind of bluish looking on this map, it means that there was a gradual decrease in the light emission over that time. The authors separated out a gradual change from an abrupt change that's more related to things like industrial projects, for example, oil and gas production, where the flares can turn on and off depending on the price of oil. But you'll notice that a lot of the world is red, and the red indicates a gradual brightening during that time period. There are a few places, most notably North Africa, the Arabian Peninsula, China, where it looks white, and that means essentially no change, that for the number of increases, there were an equal number of decreases. But overall, this map is fairly pink. There are a handful of exceptions to this. Notice Western Europe in France. There may be something real going on there, and I'm going to come back to that towards the end of the talk. But the point here is that it's not getting brighter uniformly everywhere. There's more of a dynamic nature to this phenomenon than we previously understood. But as we get more data, we're able to refine this and see in more detail how the changes are unfolding. So now, zooming in specifically to our part of the world, when I say Southern Arizona, this is just for context, this is what I mean. I put that in the context of what we call Southern Arizona within our chapter of DarkSky International, which are most, but not all of the counties that are below the Gila River. But I also put Maricopa in that, and Phoenix is a special case, and I'll explain why. But this, broadly speaking, this is the part of the world that we're talking about here. So I'm going to add some overlays to this to show you how things have been going here in our neck of the woods. So first of all, this is the kind of the bottom line map of what's happening around here. This is a quantity called the artificial light ratio. And this map product is made by the U.S. National Park Service Natural Sounds and Night Skies Division as part of their conservation work in national parks. What this color thing is, and there's a scale down here at the lower left of what the ranges of the colors are. If I consider light over the entire sky from horizon to horizon, and I add all that light up, and I say, how would that compare to a natural, unpolluted, essentially pristine night sky, where that brightness is controlled by factors like starlight and air glow, the atmosphere itself is giving off light, et cetera. If the number is 0, it means your sky is pristine. There's not a hint of artificial light, essentially in any direction. Those places are almost gone from the continental United States now. You'll notice that the lowest contour over here in this map representation is 0.6. So that means that that sky would be 60% brighter in total than a pristine sky. And you notice it just goes up from there. And of course, over the cities, you get very high numbers. In some cases, it can be a factor of 100 or higher. In the biggest cities in the world, it's a factor of several hundred. There's a connection between this number and the faintest star you could see in the sky. So this is a good indicator of the experience of seeing a night sky as a human being, where you can move your head around and you can see the entire sky. So keep this in mind. What do these numbers really translate into in a practical sense? To help explain that, I've put some ISO lines on here, contours. These are lines where that number, that artificial light ratio, is a constant. And I put 3 of them in. So you notice there's a red, a yellow, and a green line. And what these mean are at where the red line is defined, that's an artificial light ratio that's high enough that if you're in that place, the sky is sufficiently bright that you are not likely to see the Milky Way. So obviously that's the urban cores, right? If you're inside sort of the edge of the built environment of Tucson, you're not going to see the Milky Way very well. All these numbers are a little bit fuzzy. They're ultimately referred back to that satellite data set again, which they then use a model of how the light is transmitted through the atmosphere, because not all of it makes it up to the satellite. Some of it scatters. So these edges, although I've drawn them as sharp lines, bear in mind that they're a little bit fuzzy. By the time you get to, so going away from the urban centers, by the time you get to the yellow line, you're at a number that some authors from the Park Service in a paper in 2018 argued was representative of the kind of sky brightness where it's beginning to degrade the experience. So they're thinking of managing the resource of dark skies in places like national parks. And they would ideally like to keep the artificial light ratio below that number in order to have a more meaningful experience for park visitors. And then if you want to get to something close to a pristine night sky, and the magic number there, this is a bit subjective, but the magic number is 0.33. So 33% above the natural night sky. Then you would have to go to where these green contours are. And you notice that increasingly, you've got to get further and further away from Tucson to get to that. Kitt Peak is inside of that green boundary, which means that the sky out there is never pristine, never gets close to it because of the influence of light predominantly from Tucson and Phoenix. A number of our other observatories are inside that boundary as well. And if you want to get to pristine night skies, you've got to get pretty far from the cities now. So that's just to give you a sense of what the practical meaning of these numbers is. But we're also trying to protect some assets in this area. And now I've added some additional shapes here that are outlined in different colors. The U.S. National Park Service manages the shapes that are outlined in white. So that's places like Horgan Pipe Cactus National Monument out here to our west, the west and east units of Saguaro National Park, et cetera. There are also some national monuments and other kinds of protected lands that are managed by the U.S. Bureau of Land Management, and I'm showing those here in orange. And then there are these yellow stars, and the yellow stars are certified international dark sky places, which is a program that's run by DarkSky International that recognizes parks and nature reserves and other kinds of protected areas, but also communities. Saguaro National Park is on that list. It's what's called an urban night sky place because of its proximity to the city. We want to protect these places. We want to keep them in their condition. We want to bring more of these into the program across Southern Arizona over time. So as we're evaluating where to put our emphasis as a group, as a chapter of DarkSky International, this is the kind of thing that we're thinking about. So speaking of our chapter, what are we doing about this? I'm telling you that, artificial light is pervasive across Southern Arizona. You have to go increasingly far away from the cities to find natural darkness. But we have a surprising amount of it left still, even in this day with the rise of really large megacities like Phoenix. So what are we trying to do about this? So the last time I talked to you was not long after we had effectively rebooted our chapter. The Southern Arizona chapter was one of the first chapters organized by what was then called the International Dark Sky Association in the early 1990s. But the membership of the chapter was really decimated during the COVID pandemic. And a lot of the people who participated regularly did not fare well. And so the chapter leader came to us in about 2021 and said, we're having a hard time keeping this going. We would like to hand it back. So a couple of years went by, and I was on the staff of DarkSky at that time. So I had a lot of interaction with the members and with other people in the region who are interested in this. And some of them came to me and they said, well, what if we kind of restarted this in a certain way? And we got the blessing of the old chapter members. And so in 2023, we started over. And we held a public meeting that drew about 60 or 65 people came out to hear what we had in mind for this chapter. And we've been doing pretty well ever since. We've got a core group of volunteers. And most importantly, we reorganized with a new set of bylaws and a strategic plan. That's what a lot of advocacy organizations don't have. And for as much as they're trying to do good in the world, their efforts are kind of scattershot. And that's because if you try to be everything to everyone all the time, it really dilutes the power of your advocacy and the energy of your volunteers. So I encouraged the board to come up with a new way of thinking about this, which was to organize the group around a series of strategic goals. And those goals descend from 4 pillars or 4 legs of the stool that hold up our organization, our chapter. One of those is public policy, because we know that when it's properly designed and implemented, we have no better lever on this problem than things like lighting ordinances. They're not always well enforced, but when they are, we've shown that they can be effective. So policy is important to us. Measurement and modeling of monitoring. We have to be able to know the magnitude of the problem and how it's changing in order to target our energy. We, of course, want to support the International Dark Sky Places, as I mentioned. And then for us, education and outreach, it's a constant issue of raising awareness, uh, getting people's attention, keeping their attention, reminding them that this problem still exists, reminding them how it's changing, but not just coming in with a complaint, coming in with solutions. And that's what our outreach efforts are really oriented around. So these are the specific actions that we put into our first strategic plan. We're now in the third of 3 years of that. We're starting to kind of wrap things up and see how we're doing. So the question is, how are we doing with these? Some of these are kind of lofty goals. Well, I would say we're doing okay. Some of them are complete. Some of them have a ways to go, but we've made progress on all of these fronts. And some of them are going to be ongoing things. You know, the education outreach piece, that will continue indefinitely. We're finding more organizations to partner with, more events to be a presence at and to try to get our message out. And things like our communications, that's going to go on indefinitely. I did want to mention a couple of things in particular where I think we've done a fairly good job. One of them, it was a green check mark on the last slide, was building a database of lighting policies across Southern Arizona. And there are dozens of individual municipalities, and we have 8 counties in our territory. And so we went in and dug into those individually, tried to figure out whether the jurisdiction has a lighting ordinance or not. You know, where is it? Can we get a hold of the text? When was it last updated? Is it any good? And there's a mixture, as you might imagine, and this is the headline output of that effort, where now I've coded the colors of the counties and the municipalities in a particular way that represents how fresh are these ordinances. If you see something that's outlined or filled in green, that's a jurisdiction that has an ordinance that has been updated sometime in the past 20 years. And the reason that I chose 20 years is towards the earlier part of that period, that's when the LED revolution really began. And we really need to modernize old codes that still talk about lighting technologies that no longer exist, like low pressure sodium lighting. If you see something in yellow, that means there's an ordinance, but it's maybe not the most up-to-date thing. And I found instances where some jurisdictions have ordinances that are almost 50 years old and talk about things like mercury vapor lighting, which has been extinct in the wild for a long time now. There are just a handful of municipalities that are coded in red. They have nothing on their books, no kind of policy. Because of the way local government is structured under the Arizona Constitution, the county ordinances where they exist still apply in those municipalities, even if they don't have their own ordinances. And failing that, and I've coded Greenlee County in this kind of white weird dot dash thing because it's complicated. They don't have a county policy. Their municipalities don't seem to have any policies. They have some items in their design standards that are related to lighting, but it's not very clear exactly when and how they apply. So failing all of that, there is a light pollution law in Arizona, believe it or not. No one has looked at it since 1985. And every now and then somebody at the legislature gets a hold of us and says, do you know anything about this? Because we really don't. I'm going to come back to that because we may have an opening to change things. So there's good and bad here. This doesn't account for the quality of those ordinances. Some of them are great. Some of them are very not great. We want to try to change all of them. But we're going to need people power on the ground in these jurisdictions, because if we roll in as the chapter of an international organization and tell them, hey, we're here to fix your lighting ordinance, they're not going to listen to us. They're more likely to listen to locals, which is why we need to gradually recruit more people from some of these counties where right now we don't have a presence of anybody from, Yuma County or La Paz County as examples. So we need to bring in more people to be the boots on the ground and the constituents who can go and talk to the elected officials about this sort of thing. We completely started over with our website. I think we have a pretty good website now. I encourage you to check it out, darkskysoaz.org. There's a wealth of information on there. There are ways to get involved if you're so inclined. There are ways to contact us, and I encourage you, if you ever have concerns about anything related to outdoor lighting or light pollution, to do that. This is being updated as often as we can. So we're trying to add new content to it that's of value, but also giving an idea of what we're working on. What are the issues? There's a news section that talks about some of the things that we've been involved in. So feeling good about how that's going. And then the other big project of ours that's well along at this point, but not complete, is what we call the DarkSky Network. And we got some private foundation funding to support deploying little photometers. If you're familiar with what are called sky quality meters, these are little handheld electronic devices. There's a version of that that logs data, logs the measurements of sky brightness to a memory card on the inside. You can put them even in places where you have no network, no cell coverage, et cetera. And we're running some of those on Raspberry Pis with cellular transceivers, that sort of thing, so we can, in places where we do have some network connectivity at some level, we're able to get the data to come back to us in near real time. All of those little markers up there on the map are representative places that we either have monitors or we want to place them. So the green markers show where they're in place now. Some of them we provided, some we partnered with organizations that already have them. So turns out Kit Peak had a couple of them, and Mount Graham had one that they were willing to share their data, et cetera. But we've also been putting them in places where there wasn't anything previously. For the yellow markers, those are places that we have in mind to place them. We don't have hosts yet. So we need to find somebody on the ground who will let us, plug into power, which we can run on solar if we need to, but to just physically locate our monitors. And this is beginning to have some results already. We've got the better part of a year of data from some of the newer monitors, and we're already seeing enough interesting things in the data that there are some science results. And we're right now working on the manuscript of a scientific paper that talks about some of those results. This is an example of what the output of those monitors looks like. And I'm not going to go into detail other than to say, this is a kind of a dashboard. You can go to our website, find the DarkSky Network. It'll take you to a map that looks very much like the one that I just showed you, that you can click on the monitor. It takes you to this interactive dashboard that lets you show whatever period of time you want to look at. And it's telling you information about how bright the sky was during those periods of time. There's a guess as to whether there were clouds, et cetera. And we're permanently warehousing all this data in a database so that we can serve it over time. Lots of ideas about how to expand this, other kinds of data products that we can make available. Why are we doing it? If we want to understand how the threat is developing, this is the best way to get an early warning. So if we strategically place the monitors in places that we're worried about light getting significantly brighter over time, we'll see that in our data long before it is evident to the eye. And especially in places that are remote, where you don't typically have a lot of people who would be there to see this, it's the only information that we have. When we couple that with the satellite data, it's very powerful, and I'll show you an example of that in a moment. So in the last section here, I want to talk to you about challenges and opportunities. I'm going to deal with these separately, and always start with the bad news and then leave on a high note is what you're supposed to do as a speaker. So I'm going to talk about those challenges first, the things that are most concerning to us in this area. The number one thing that's been a threat here for decades is land development. And I'm trying to phrase it as nicely as I can by calling it land use intensity, which is what the planners call it. The fact is that even though our population growth has slowed compared to what it was 20 or 30 years ago, the cities out here are still sprawling. And with that sprawl comes lighting on roadways and new commercial lighting. And now we're seeing things like digital signs that are not very well regulated, particularly. And as the cities grow and they spread, that means more light. I showed you in the beginning when I said that the light at night map of the United States was really just a population density map. That's because there's kind of a figure of merit that suggests how much light is emitted per person. And that's not a constant number across the United States, but we got a kind of a ballpark figure. So if you imagine every additional person who moves in here, they're probably going to add that much more light emission. And some fraction of that is going to make it into the night sky, even under the best of conditions. So how is that playing out on the ground? Remember earlier I showed you the map of the world that I said was the gradual change in brightness detected by satellite, and there were all these kind of reds and pinks and some blues. So this is what you get if you zoom in particular to Southern Arizona. And again, the red means more light emission over time, the blue means less. And there's one notable thing here. All of the cities basically have more or less increased in brightness in the last decade. But look at Tucson. Look at the blue in Tucson. And I also told you earlier that the satellite doesn't see some of the blue light that our white LED fixtures emit. And so you might cynically look at that and say, well, you know, we converted a lot of lighting to LED during that time, and the satellite just isn't seeing it. So the apparent decrease isn't real. And I'm here to tell you that actually the apparent decrease is at least partially real because we measured it. During the course of Tucson's conversion of its street lights about 10 years ago to the white LED lights that are out there now from older, much brighter high-pressure sodium lamps, this is real. And we also measured a change at some of the observatories as far away as Kitt Peak, where their skies got a little bit darker during the modernization of the streetlights. That's really important for us because it's an anchor where we can go talk to other cities and say, hey, look, Tucson did this. You know, there's no reason that you can't do this too. So as with that global map, there's kind of some good and there's some bad here, but a lot of it traces back to the intensity of land use. And you'll notice way up there at the top, what worries me right now is the growth in the Southeast Valley in Phoenix, out in places like Queen Creek and the Santan Valley. It's just exploding out there right now. And a lot of it is their lighting is not very well regulated. We are worried about other things too, other kinds of land use. Mining has been important in Southern Arizona for over 100 years, and it's going to continue to be in the future, especially now that the US government considers certain kinds of minerals to be critical to national security and are finding new and interesting ways to dig them up out of the ground. Many people are still thinking of things like copper mining, which has obviously been important here for a long time. And in particular, the open pit style of copper mining, where there was a lot of light at the surface because you had to illuminate this giant hole in the ground while they were hauling the copper ore out. This is an example of what the future might look like in certain respects. You might have heard of this project that's down near Patagonia called South 32 Hermosa. Their site is already extracting, but they want to significantly expand their operation. And they hired me to do some simulations of what the changes to the night sky could be like as a result of the lighting that they knew they were going to have to install at the site. And these pictures on the right are representations of the night sky. If you think of the hemisphere of the night sky flattened out on a tabletop, like a certain kind of a map projection. So the zenith is at the top in the center, and the horizon runs along the lower edge, 360 degrees around. The picture at the top is actual measurements from close to their site in 2023. The bottom picture is one of the simulations that I ran for them. They're not exactly lined up in azimuth, so that's why the colors don't match precisely. The colors are the brightness of the night sky, going from blues that are kind of like low brightness up through, you know, green, yellow, red, et cetera. And the core, the almost white color in the top panel, that's Nogales, which is a lot closer to them than Tucson, and there are some mountains in the way. The bottom line is that the change, what they're proposing, is not zero. It's also not catastrophic. And that's because a lot of their activity is below ground, that we don't have to dig giant holes in the ground anymore to extract certain minerals. So it's not as though there won't be any change, but it's a far cry from what it would have been if we were having this conversation, say, 50 years ago, and it was almost all open pit mining. We also keep an eye on public lands in our region, which are threatened, of course. I showed you a map where the national parks and monuments, et cetera, were located. There's kind of good news and bad news. Good news, one of our national monuments is perhaps set to get an upgrade. There's a bill in Congress right now to convert Chiricahua National Monument's designation into a national park, which would come with a higher level of protection than it has right now. Unfortunately, that bill is stalled in committee, and being that it's an election year, it's unlikely that it's going to move before this Congress terms out. I'm going to try to get it reintroduced in the next session, see what happens. There's no opposition to it, but probably aware that Congress has got some other things that it's worried about right now. That's good and bad, because on the other end of the spectrum, there are people who want to take protected status away from public lands in Arizona. There is a bill in another committee right now to try to rescind the designation of 2 Arizona national monuments, one of which is Ironwood Forest, which is that white outline in the center of the picture on the left. Ironwood Forest National Monument is not very well known, but it protects key habitat for the ironwood tree and all of the things that depend on it, essentially. And you'll notice, again, going back to that artificial light ratio map with those color contours, and I said the yellow was what the Park Service considers the sort of the conservation limit of brightness of the night sky. And it is uncomfortably touching the eastern side of the monument, and the outer contour from Phoenix is now clipping the north. We got a monitor placed out there quite recently, and now we're starting to get sky brightness data. But there are some members of the Arizona congressional delegation that want to take the status away from that monument, which is a candidate international dark sky park, and you bet we're going to go to bat over that issue. And this is what we stand to lose if we lose Ironwood Forest. If you know Sean Parker, he's a photographer here in Tucson. This is one of his images taken out there. And yes, there's a glow of Phoenix over there in the lower left, but it's still a great place to see the night sky. Other good news, Oregon Pipe Cactus just recently got its designation from our parent organization as International Dark Sky Park, which was hard won. It took them 10 years. A lot of staff changes out there, a lot of politics, as you might imagine, but they got it done. And there is a threat out there that you're probably aware of. You probably know what I'm going to say here. And it has to do with a certain international boundary that runs through the southern edge of the park. We've been looking at satellite data on the US-Mexico border. Over there in the map on the left, it's kind of hard to see, but I've outlined the national monument boundary in green. And then in the segment of the border that crosses through Oregon Pipe Cactus, I've broken this up into 5 segments. Just they're something like 25 or 30 kilometers, and added up the light from the satellite. Again, we don't see all of it, but if we're just talking about relative changes, it's still very useful information. And those segments are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 from west to east. And during the period around 2021 or so, when there was active construction on the border barrier, we saw it. That's what those 2 red arrows on the right are pointing out. So we're plotting the amount of light seen by satellite in those little strips of land on the border as a function of time. And in the very segments that we know the construction was taking place, we saw that light. So flash forward a few years, and now there is pre-construction activity taking place in segment 4. We as a group, we take no position on whether a border barrier is a good idea or not. We take no position on whether immigration policy is good or not. But if there is a threat to the dark skies in an international dark sky park, we have an opinion about that. And we are talking to Customs and Border Patrol in hopes of trying to educate them, to suggest that, you know, they're putting in permanent lighting that luckily has not been turning on as far as we can tell, but that there are better ways to do surveillance of the border that don't involve flooding it with artificial light at night. But despite all this, we've got to aim bigger. We're really focused on grassroots. We're still trying to raise awareness of this issue among people who live in Southern Arizona. And that's in an area where they're already, I think, kind of inclined to understand some of this. You ask most people in Tucson, why are there few streetlights in the residential neighborhoods? And they'll probably say because of the observatories, right? So we start off with a little advantage there, but it's hard to get through still at some level. And we end up playing whack-a-mole. You know, we deal with an issue in one jurisdiction, and then something happens next door, and that then impacts where we, you know, made the small win over here. Because the fact of the matter is light pollution doesn't respect your boundaries. So if we're not coming up with some kind of approach that's bigger than this, than the purely local level, it's unlikely that I think we're ever going to make significant progress. At the same time, we live in an interesting period of history one that's very contentious. And as much as I really want to frame this as a nonpartisan issue, you probably can imagine how aspects of it can really inflame some opinions in certain quarters. I think we try to do a good job of casting it as nonpartisan and something that's in the community interest and something that balances things like property rights against environmental harm. But in a highly politically polarized era, there's a lot of mistrust. And if we can't overcome that barrier, we don't get to the other side where we can start talking about the real substance of the issue. And this is something that's challenging for us in our communications as it is for a lot of science-based organizations right now, as you might imagine. And I say here that the pandemic changed the landscape. In a literal sense, in a figurative sense, it did some things to what people value, where they want emphasis put in the policy world, in the world of economic development, et cetera. But it might have come across in a way to us that's good because it caused people to rethink some aspects of the relationship to the environment. During the time when much of the world was locked down in the pandemic, we saw ecosystems start to rebound. We saw parts of the world get darker, for example, simply because lights were being turned off. Some of those changes stuck, some of them didn't. But there just seems to be a different mentality about some of these things on the other side of the pandemic that I hope is better than not. So I'm going to end with a brief discussion of some of the opportunities here in the last few minutes. And something that really works in our favor is this institution right here, the University of Arizona. This is from a report in 2023 through the Eller College that found that at U of A alone, not talking about the federally funded facilities, observatories, places like that, U of A alone accounts for over $560 million a year of economic activity in Southern Arizona, related specifically to astronomy and space science. So every time we have a conversation with an elected official where they say, well, who are you? And my constituents don't care about this. I say, do your constituents care about the economic impact equivalent to what a Super Bowl host city can expect to realize that comes to this community every year? And you don't even have to go out and bid for it. That has opened some doors, fortunately. So to the extent that people care about the economic vitality of Southern Arizona, they should care about dark skies, and that works in our favor. I mentioned the Tucson streetlight conversion program that demonstrated that when we do things right, what we say is going to happen is what happens. So I can put this in front of people in planning departments, in street transportation departments of a municipal government and say, basically, Tucson did it, we validated it, the sky got darker. You know, it did not cause society to fall apart. We don't see any uptick in either overnight crime or overnight traffic accidents. There's apparently no consequence having to do with those things because of the light change. And the city is saving money on top of that. We present this as win-win-win all the way around. And then the task becomes, how do we get people in city government to pay attention to this issue long enough that they take the lessons to heart and then put them into practice? Now I'm going to say some really crazy things. How about running a bill before the Arizona legislature, perhaps as early as next session? We're talking to some people who have the right connections to, at a minimum, modernize the existing light pollution statute in Arizona to bring it into the 21st century, ideally to strengthen it and certainly to make it more resistant to potential attack. Every now and then somebody in the legislature says, why do we have this dark sky thing? What is that benefit to the state of Arizona? And so we swoop in and we try to give them an idea of why it's important. At some point, I think we're going to have an inroad to do that, and it may be coming soon. So watch this space, meaning the Senate chamber in Phoenix. Now I'm going to say something really crazy. How about federal legislation? Isn't that nuts? Me saying we could get a bill about anything through Congress? Maybe not today, but with any movement that results in successful federal legislation, you lay a foundation and it takes years to get to the final destination. We have already started this process. We're working with the American Astronomical Society on this, starting to talk to members of Congress and their staff, holding informational briefings, telling them that ultimately what we want is what I like to call the Clean Night Skies Act, patterned after the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act. And that might involve something as simple as Congress saying, you know what, sometimes artificial light at night is an environmental pollutant. and it has harms. And we recognize that. And we're going to tell the EPA to set limits on emissions, much as they do with air pollution and water pollution, and implement those rules on the states. If you think that's crazy, I'm going to suggest that it's not, because there are other countries that have done exactly that. So one of the goals is we might say that the waste associated with unnecessary light at night that results in light pollution is environmental pollution, and it has serious consequences. And we should do something about that. We should do it through sensible regulation, like we would other forms of pollution. Other countries are doing this immediately to our south. In 2018, Mexico designated light pollution a form of environmental pollution under its existing environmental law. And it has since been working on crafting the detailed regulations that will eventually make their way down to the municipal level in Mexico, that we hope will result in that country getting a little bit darker as a result. But there are other countries. I mentioned France earlier. There's some early signs that their light pollution law from 2019 is truly beginning to make that country a bit darker. And the same thing, we're not hearing about, the breakdown of society in France over this. So I think there's reason to believe that you can do this and you can lower light pollution and you don't have any negative social or economic impact by doing so. We really would like to see lighting become a crucial part of urban planning and design, not something that you hang on to the design standards after the fact. That's going to take a lot of work with the planning community to educate them about these issues, to convince them that the way we put it is the better way to do things with regard to the way we light our cities. There are various ways that we might approach that. I would like to see, going back to that map of all the jurisdictions in Southern Arizona and all of them with outdated lighting ordinances, I would love to see them all come into the 21st century and have best practice built into their codes, because we know that it's good for the environment. We know that it doesn't have a negative effect on society, and it might just be good for the bottom line of a lot of jurisdictions that are perpetually strapped for cash, right? So we're trying to play this up as something that's good all the way around. And then lastly, the thing it's still kind of experimental is this notion that, well, what if we get the various jurisdictions together? I said light pollution doesn't care about your boundaries, right? It just drifts right over your boundary into some other jurisdiction. We have come up with these conservation districts for things like water in Arizona, very famously. Why can't we do this we can think about it for light, but really what we're trying to conserve is the resource, which is the darkness. Can we do that and also have continued economic growth in our cities? Can we do this in a way that's more sustainable? I believe this absolutely. Now I just have to convince associations of governments across our state to buy into that same thinking. So with these threats come these good possibilities for the future. And the message that I always leave you all with when I come and talk is that we are making decisions today as individuals, as voters, as communities, as municipalities and counties that will affect what dark skies are like here many years in the future. So my ask of you is to keep these ideas in mind as you make decisions, whether you're property owners or when you go to vote, et cetera. These decisions will have a ripple effect down the road potentially for decades. And lastly, something that you might be interested in if you want to learn more about the scientific basis for all this that I've been talking about. Every year, DarkSky International puts out a report called Artificial Light at Night, State of the Science. And it's the best of what we know about this subject through vetted scientific research. We write it in a language that's understandable to people who are not scientists. It's very approachable to the public. We'll give you a nice overview in several different broad categories where science has to do something with this topic. You can get to it at that link in orange, or I'll leave this up and you can, if you want, you can scan the QR code. And if anybody has any concerns about lighting, you want to talk about this topic more, I'd be glad to hear from you. Feel free to get a hold of me at one of those email addresses or through social media channels. So thank you again. Happy to take your questions.
We'll start with questions here in the room. We have one here in front.
Thanks for the talk, John. One aspect you didn't address, my question is, do any of these lighting ordinance, state, county, city, have any effect on what comes out of the university? which is one of the great light trespassers around here. It's unbelievable.
It is. It is. I'm happy to report that facilities updated their master plan that included their lighting standards. And they did that quite recently. Every few years they do. This time around, they actually reached out to us and we were able to comment on their plan. It's better than it would have been. We didn't get everything that we wanted in it. And I also had discussions with people in facilities about, why do you leave the stadium lights on? Why do you leave the lights on the practice fields? I was out here in February at 11:30 on a Sunday night and both of them were on and not a soul in sight. And you bring this up and the facilities people are like, oh yeah, we didn't know about that. Like, well, the people who live in the neighborhoods immediately south of the university, they're probably very familiar with it. I know, I know. You can see it from the mountain. You can see it in other parts of town. Jurisdiction-wise, the university is its own entity. It doesn't have to follow any local codes. It sometimes tries to. It wants to be a good neighbor. They kind of fall short in some respects, and I think lighting is one of them. U of A can do a better job. So if U of A folks are listening, come talk to us. We'll help you. Yeah, you bet.
Do you approach homeowners associations?
Great question. Do we approach homeowners associations? The answer is yes. We present to them. We have model CC&Rs, if you know what that is, the covenants for homeowner associations. Sometimes they say, we'd like to write something about lighting into our covenants and we don't know how to do that. So we can give them samples. We've helped people out with lighting problems that they've had with neighbors and do a little educating of the homeowners association in the process. That's great because they can do things, to be honest, that the city and the county government won't do.
I had a neighbor that put new lighting on his garage,
Mhm.
and it's a fairly dark area that I live in. But since he did that, it brightened up my yard, which messed up using my telescope.
Yes. Sometimes if you live in an association, sometimes they'll do something about it, sometimes they won't. Unfortunately, well, you can make complaints to the city or the county, depending on whether you're in or outside city boundaries. I can tell you that the city of Tucson, if you make a lighting complaint, will tell you, well, we don't have code compliance staff who work at night. Trying to work on them as well.
I'll mention that I reported the streetlights near our house were in the county, and the county came out and adjusted the angles, and they were I was impressed.
Mhm.
Also, there was at Stewart Observatory, there was a presentation by the lighting people for the U of A, and they said that the overall emissions have been dropped by 30%, I think, on the mall, but I've noticed being on the mall, it's a lot brighter
It's a
than it
lot
used
brighter.
to be.
Yes.
But they say that the emissions are lower. So they have measurements. I don't understand that, but
I'd love to see their data.
yeah, me too. Other questions?
Can you tell me, how do you define a dark sky location?
So the question is, how do you define a dark sky location? If you are defining that in the context of the Dark Sky International program that I mentioned, they have some criteria for what they consider to be dark. And I can quote you some numbers that to most people probably won't mean anything and have to do with the measured brightness of the night sky. They've tried to link that number to some visual indicators like whether the Milky Way is visible from a location. That is an indicator of a dark sky. Are there bright and glary light sources in the environment, et cetera. But there is not even agreement within, say, the research community as to what a dark sky is, in part because it's a subjective human experience at some level. I can tell you, if you say, well, what's a dark sky to a sea turtle or to a Mexican gray wolf or some other species that's threatened by this, and I can say, well, at this level, we start to see in the scientific literature reports of strange behaviors and that sort of thing. It's a little more specific, but it's really dependent on the species. But if we say the aesthetic appreciation of the night sky, what is dark? That is a question that the individual has to answer.
You mentioned a couple of times the Milky Way. You're talking about seeing the Milky Way with the naked eye?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Yes, and you might only, if your sky is sufficiently bright, you might only see it when it's high in the sky in the zenith in the summer, for example. Whereas in a darker area, you'd be able to follow it all the way down to the horizon. So how much of it you see then also becomes an indication of the brightness of the sky. Yes, sir.
Oh, we have another question here in the back.
Yeah, I have a quick question, and we already talked about this. Another person gave a talk about dark skies a couple of years ago, and Terry told me the reason on mountain where I live, they put up those yellow solar lights, and then they took them down. And Terry had mentioned this at that time, that because it costs too much money, but they're solar. How could that cost money? So I'm still confused about that, because now there are no lights from Fort Lowell all the way down to Limberlost, no lights at all. And then they put up those other lights from Fort Lowell Mountain all the way up, all the way up to Speedway. I'm like, okay. The other quick question was, I did go to Portal and everybody there cooperates. There are no lights.
Yes.
You use your really dim parking lights.
Yeah.
And so there's two extremes, people that, believe and they all collaborate, and then people that want to develop. These are two extremes. So I don't know.
And it really shows you the range, right? It shows you the range of possibilities. About those solar lights, to be honest, usually the problem with those is the upfront cost is comparatively high. So it costs more to put them in to begin with, even though you get the electricity savings. And it also depends on whether there's already an existing electrical line they can tap into. So now if you have to run electric out there, in addition to the electricity expense itself, now you've got an infrastructure expense. Yeah, Portal is a great example of what happens when people decide they want to keep things dark. So a few years ago, when the people at the Astronomers Village said, oh, Cochise County might approve a giant cannabis growing greenhouse a mile away from the Astronomers Village, they turned out in force. And needless to say, the permit wasn't issued. But that's, I didn't even talk about greenhouses, but that's a thing that's increasing in Southern Arizona as well. No regulation. You can basically put a greenhouse anywhere. If it will fit with the land use code, there's almost nothing in the law that limits the light emissions. And of course, that's now a 24-hour-a-day business. I hate to be that cynical, but money does make things move and happen. So, yeah. Yes, and so the comment was about tourism being a bigger part of the Arizona economy earlier, and at some level it still is. I'm glad you mentioned that, because something I didn't talk about, it related to, I said that U of A's space science and astronomy generates over $500 million of economic activity a year. There's this nascent thing called astrotourism, and there's even a little bit of it around the edges here in Tucson and other parts of Arizona, where people are coming from, in some cases, very large distances from the other side of the world to see a dark sky like we have out here in our very clear air of the Western US. And we think, we're getting data on this, but we think they have a bigger economic spend per visitor than your conventional tourist does. And as we like to say, you can't drive through dark skies, right? You can go to the Grand Canyon or Oregon Pipe or Saguaro National Park, and you can spend a few hours and spend no more than the cost of park admission. But a person who wants to do a nighttime activity, that's an automatic overnight stay, and you immediately almost triple the typical spend, right? So we try to play that up with the elected officials as well. Like, you've got this resource at your doorstep, and you have entrepreneurs that are setting up businesses that cater to this kind of tourism. It doesn't take a lot of effort to keep what you already have. It's harder to build new tourism industries and products that you don't already have.
Okay, we'll move to the Zoom comments and questions. This is from Sam. It says, just a comment, as we approach the Arizona legislature, we will need a team of significant bodies throughout Arizona to support the effort to protect our night skies. Given that TAAA has a large presence across Arizona, TAAA can play a role to join us and convince the legislatures.
When the time is right, expect to hear from us. Yes,
Okay.
yes.
This one, I don't know, it's some code, but I don't know who's asking this. It says multiple giant data centers and their gas turbine power plants are being planned now for undeveloped or AG areas, I guess it says, in Pima and Pinal counties south of Eloy. Are these being recognized as a significant threat coming in the next few years?
The short answer to the question is whether data centers are a threat in terms of light pollution. The answer is yes, but a qualified yes because they don't have to be. We've looked at some examples, other places in the United States, and we see kind of good, bad, and everything in between. We see some really egregious examples, and then we see some data centers where I think they're so concerned about security that they really don't want to be lit up at night. They don't want to draw attention to themselves. We are aware of, obviously, Project Blue, but we're also aware of this development in Pinal County called La Osa. That's a much bigger facility. And we are already working up our comment to the Pinal County Board of Supervisors, who will take up that issue formally in August. And our message is, like a lot of things, we're not going to say whether data centers are a good or bad thing, right? There are plenty of other organizations that are going to take that stand. We're going to say to the Pinal County Supervisors, you have a lighting code. They're in the process of revising it, as a matter of fact, and we expect you to implement that correctly when this comes up. The data center doesn't have to be a problem from a light pollution perspective, but it will be in the hands of the county supervisors as to whether it is or isn't.
Okay, Thomas says, does the chapter actively participate in the Tucson Pima Outdoor Lighting Code Committee, which is currently discussing updating the 2012 Outdoor Lighting Code?
Thomas, absolutely. We have been at the table since the current outdoor lighting code revision process began in 2018. Yes, you heard that right. It's been going on for 8 years. And I think they're about 80 or 85% of the way there. And they keep getting hung up on certain technical details. And as you might imagine, there are a lot of stakeholders who come to these meetings and they have a lot of opinions about this. So we make sure to be there at every meeting as a presence to remind them. And every time they have issued a version of the revised code for public comment, we have always submitted public comments. And we will continue to do that up until the end of this process.
Okay. From Alex, says, are there any effects from the switch to blue LEDs that we might not be considering that could mess with measurement results? For example, the different wavelengths from sodium vapor could affect how much light pollution a person can perceive.
Yes, Alex, that's 100% correct. As the color of the world has changed, the visual impression of the night sky has also changed. I'm going to show you, I threw this in here in case I had an opportunity. This is pretty interesting stuff. This was provided to me by an astronomer at the MMT Observatory south of Tucson. And without getting into a super amount of technical detail, what I'm showing you is lots and lots and lots of spectra of the night sky. So you take the light coming into the telescope, you break it up into colors with optics, and you measure how much light there is at each color. So in this picture, the color runs up this vertical scale from blue to red. And as you go across, that's where you're at in time. So it's like we took that rainbow and we stacked it a bunch of times every time we took a sample. And they've got nearly, by this point, when I got this picture, they have nearly 20 years worth of that data. And what I'm pointing out, you see those streaks that are either light or dark? They're white or black. If it's gray, it means there really isn't anything changing. But you'll notice that some things like the one that I have marked there is fluorescent, or the one down here in the 2020s that says white LED. We're literally seeing the color of the night sky evolve in near real time. with data sources like this. And that does matter for the visual impression because the more blue light there is, that means the lower part of this figure, and see where that white LED is. The more blue light, the brighter the night sky is going to be to the human eye, in part because we are more sensitive to blue light under low light conditions like you experience at night. And then on top of it, blue light scatters really well in the atmosphere. It's the same reason that the sky is blue during the daytime. So you put those together and the net effect can be this disproportionate apparent brightening of the sky. And that might have something to do with the globe at night results that I showed you earlier, where I said the night sky was getting brighter at 10% per year. I have a feeling that at some level that has to do with the changing color of the night sky.
Okay, Brian asks if your slides will be available to us.
Brian, I will be happy to make my slides available. Just get in contact with the TAAA folks or email me.
Or email. Doug Nelson says, good presentation, thank you. This is a subject that should be important to everyone.
Thank you.
Judd says, what are the stars that are used to determine the sky brightness? I think I guess it's the globe at night.
For the Globe at Night
Yeah,
program.
I think so.
Yeah, so they arrange their year into a series of campaigns that run for 10 days to 2 weeks, and they center on when the new moon is, so that the earlier part of the evening, the moon will be out of the way. That's the kind of condition where you want to make this measurement. And then they choose a constellation in the northern hemisphere and in the southern hemisphere that will be prominent during those early evening hours. And they give you these little comparison charts, and they basically ask you to look at the constellation and look at these charts that are arranged in half magnitude increments and say, what does your sky most resemble of these versions? And as you step through them, you start seeing more stars and more stars and more stars. They just pick one. Tell us what looks the most like your sky. And that's where we found out that if you pull all of these observations together in aggregate, that with this method, people can make magnitude estimates to better than a half, which is really not bad when you're talking about the public that's never been exposed to these ideas before.
Mike says that there is an astrotourism panel at the Arizona Governor's Conference on Tourism in Tucson this August, and there's a link in the chat. And then Dan says he just made a donation to DarkSky International and encourage others to support this noble cause.
Thank you very much, Dan.
Does the local chapter also take donations?
We do. We do.
Okay.
We're a 501c3 nonprofit, and we are able to take your donations.
Okay, now let me switch over to YouTube and see if there's any questions there. Let's see. Yes, from Heidi. How do increases in data centers affect dark skies if they do? I think you answered that. Yeah. She says that answered my question.
Great.
And then are vehicle lights also, this is from Jeremy. I think it's Jeremy. Are vehicle lights also considered? Is there any effort to regulate them in terms of light pollution?
Jeremy, that is such a great question. And if I had more time, I would tell you about the experiment that I want to do to answer that question. And what got me thinking about this is if I take that image of the world at night and I zoom in to Southern Arizona and I really crank up the contrast, I can see light along the interstates because it takes so many minutes for the satellite to fly over and it's adding up the light. It uses a thing called it's called a push broom detector. It basically scans across the earth. And I am convinced that that's real. And it's light from headlights, a lot of which is truck traffic at night because the satellite flies over at 1:30 a.m. local time, wherever you happen to be. So of course, it's going to pick up a lot of the trucks on the interstate. And that got me to thinking, I think the answer is yes. And I think there's a way that we could figure out how much it is. It's not the dominant source by any means. But I think that if I'm right, the sky over Tucson, for example, is probably a little bit brighter during rush hour in the evening in the winter when the sun goes down early. And we could probably figure that out. Now, I think the greater concern about these super bright headlights that if you say those headlights, everybody knows what you're talking about, that are a real glare problem. That to me, public safety, much bigger issue than the light pollution aspect. But I can tell you it's definitely not zero. but we don't yet know how much those lights contribute to light pollution.
And that's all the questions that I have.
Okay. Well, thank you again for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for your enlightening presentation. Next on our program, we would normally have our planet report from Dr. Eric Akashka. Eric is a regular attendee of the Grand Canyon Star Party, so like many of us, he appears to already have headed up there. So you can see his report on the landing page of our website. Go to the website, scroll down a little bit, and there you'll find his report for the month. And do we have any new members here tonight? We have a new member in the back. We want to hear who you are. We'll be there in just a second.
Yesterday, and she explained to me all about the meeting today and how these people are working wonderfully on the topic. I just wanted to come down here and listen to what this all about is.
Okay, we appreciate you coming. And could you hang around for just a little bit after the meeting? I'd like to talk to you if
Sure.
I could. All right, appreciate it. That is our program for the night. I have we have another member, another new member?
Not quite. My
Oh.
name's Tim Strickland. I want to be a member. My friend Thomas here encouraged me to come down, see what the meetings were all about. So I'm looking to sign up however you do that.
Okay. Well, the easiest way to sign up is go to the website, and you'll see up on the tab how to join. That's the easiest way. We're here every Friday. Please continue to join us. We usually have a few more people in the audience. We are part of the Dark Sky effort at the Grand Canyon. We have this year a record turnout of volunteers at the Grand Canyon. They're expecting a nice crowd, and that is another success of Dark Sky programs. The Grand Canyon has worked really hard over the last 5 years to adjust its lighting, and we have noticed that it is increasingly dark and making it even grander when we're there with our visitors during the Grand Canyon week. Okay, any questions about the organization, or anybody else have any comments before we wrap it up? Terry's going to check online. We have a skeleton IT staff. You can see Terry running from job to job. She's doing a great job tonight, don't you think?
Okay, there is a new member online, Dave O'Brien. I will unmute you and you can, whoops, maybe not. Let me see, how can I do this? Well, I have to give him permission. I have to give him the permission, so I have to get in here and then say participants. And there. Okay, you should be able to unmute yourselves if you're on Zoom.
Okay, this is Dave O'Brien. Can you hear me?
Sure.
Yes, we can.
Oh, great. Yeah, sorry I couldn't make it in person tonight, but hopefully I'll be at the next one. Just wanted to say I've been meaning to join for like 15 years, and finally I did it. So I hope to be more active with the club and check out some of the dark sky sites and things like that.
Excellent. We hope to see you out there at one of those dark sky sites and meetings every first Friday of the month. So we'll see you here. It's been a long wait to see you, 15 years. Can't wait. Welcome.
Okay, and we also have a new member, David, on Zoom. Do you want to unmute? Okay, he says, David says, I don't have audio video capability. Oops, disappeared. Let me get back. Where is it? But I am new to Arizona, moved here from the DC area last year.
Well, having lived in the DC area myself, I think that you've had an improvement in your skies. And we can't wait to see you at one of our meetings or at one of our dark sky sites. So check that out on the website. You'll see where they are and when those are most active. And welcome as a member. Welcome to Arizona. Okay, we have just one more announcement for the night.
Okay, so some of us will be going over to the IHOP located at 4040 East 22nd Street. That's on the south side of the street between Columbus and Alvernon. If you're in the room and you want to go, put your hand up. It's a small crew, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of us. So get maybe table for 7 or 8. And if you're on Zoom, you are welcome to join us. That's it.
Okay, thank you for joining us tonight, and we'll see you next month.